Happy Learning Day to everybody. This is the beginning of our World War II unit, and it actually works out kind of well that we have an e-learning day today, because I can get a fair bit of this covered here in about 15 minutes or less. We're just going to get through part one of sort of Hitler's foreign policy and how it led to the Second World War. Obviously, we're in a U.S. history class, but it still is important to sort of refresh on the background of the Second World War and have an understanding where the war is at when we jump in 1941 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So the way that this unit, just to sort of cover the general outline of the way that this unit's going to work, is we're not really going to get into the fighting of the Second World War. That is going to be our next chapter. I believe this coming chapter, I know, is chapter 14. Chapter 15 will then be the actual American involvement in World War II. This is just going to be the run-up, sort of the background information, and then we'll also cover Pearl Harbor at the end of this chapter as well. It's important to understand that wars, especially ones like the Second World War, which is so large and so encompassing, are difficult to cover. So I'm sure that there are a number of you that have seen, any of the thousands, if not, millions of documentaries out there on the Second World War. And I'm sure that all of them are great. I'm sure some of them are not so great. Unfortunately, we can't cover every single angle that you may want. But we are going to try to cover sort of the broad strokes of the war, how it affected life here at home, and how it affected the world, at large. And it all starts with sort of a reminder of Hitler's foreign policy and the origins of the Second World War. So what you're going to need to do is, on your own sheet of paper, you're just going to need to go ahead and, write down the notes like usual, so that we can continue these when we get back to class tomorrow. And we will try to get through more of this lecture tomorrow, which would be Tuesday, February the 13th. And like I said, we're just going to get through the first part of this, which is only really a few slides of actual information. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and get going. You're going to want to write down these 6 terms. So hopefully you use that sort of 2.5 minute intro to write down the title, and if not, just of this lecture, if not, just skip back and get it. You're then going to need to sort of want to write down each of these 6 terms, because we will define them throughout the lecture, both today and then tomorrow as we sort of go through the rest of it. I think we're only going to get through a couple of these terms today, and then we'll get to the rest of them later. So even if you need to pause the video right now to be able to get these 6 written down, make sure you leave yourself some room so that you can define them, because they are going to be referred to both in this lecture and then in future lectures as we talk about World War II. They are rearmament, Anschluss, plebiscite, appeasement, the Sudetenland, and the Rhineland. Keep in mind that my pronunciation is not always correct. I am prone to mispronounce things. So there's 20 years difference between these two pictures. The first one, the one on the left, is Hitler and some of his fellow German soldiers during World War I, and then on the right is Hitler, sort of as his height during World War II. And the question becomes how far or how much is Hitler responsible for World War II? And you'll find a number of historians that will argue that he is completely and totally responsible for World War II. And a lot of it has to do with, and we'll talk about this a little bit more as we move on, a lot of it has to do with his experiences in World War I. So Hitler is very, very much responsible for World War II. In fact, a lot of people will tell you that he is completely responsible. You have to remember his aims in foreign policy, and I'm going to try to bring up. Now I can't bring up my underlining, so I'm just going to have to rely on. You're just going to have to listen to me. Hitler does write a book. It's at this point in history, it's fairly well known and fairly famous, Mein Kampf, which is entitled My Struggle. So you might want to make that your first note. Is his book Mein Kampf means my struggle. I would take note of that. And in this book, he writes down his 3 major foreign policy aims. And again, you need to summarize these at the very least. You need to understand what they are. One is to make Germany into a great power. So the first aim is to make Germany into a great power. And it says again, there in the text of the notes, and again is kind of a subjective term. Germany had really only been a unified country for about 50 or 60 years going into the First World War. It was really a relative newcomer in terms of the land powers of Europe. They had been united for only, like I said, about 60 years. So to make them into a great power again, they were certainly a great power in the First World War, but it's not like they had the long-term staying power of a France or of a Britain. And France, remember, is their chief land rival. The second aim is to unite all German-speaking people. Okay, and this is uniting German-speaking people, irregardless of borders. A lot of times Hitler gets the rap of, wanting world domination. And it's not so much that he wants world domination as much as he wants to unite all German-speaking people. And to his mind, he should be ruling, or these people should be under his power, regardless of where they live, whether they live in Germany, whether they live in some of the Franco territories, the French territories, whether they live in the United States even. So his second aim is for all German-speaking people to be under his rule. The last one, or the last of his foreign policy aims, is to gain territory for Germany. And you could even just write, as this third point, the term Lebensraum, which is living space. He wants living space for the German-speaking people. And the main place that he wants to spread is to the east, which for Germany would be Russia. He wants to expand towards Russia. And that's the third of his aims, which, again, if you sort of follow the logic of these backwards, in order to unite all these German-speaking people, you're going to need space for them to live, which explains why you need to gain territory for them. And in uniting all German-speaking people, you're going to turn Germany back into a great power. You've got to remember that Germany had been really hamstrung by the Treaty of Paris that ends the First World War. They had territory stripped away from them. And so Hitler, these 3 aims are to sort of restore Germany to the Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Versailles, the pre-Treaty of Versailles power that it was. So that's what he wants to do. So how is he going to do this? Okay. So achieving what he wants to do, the first thing is he has to destroy the Treaty of Versailles. Okay. So how is he going to do this? You're writing your notes down. How is he going to do this? Well, first things first is you have to destroy the Treaty of Versailles. It's going to be very difficult because the Treaty of Versailles had not only pared back Germany's land holdings, but it had pared back Germany's military to the point where it was basically a National Guard force. They did not have a true military anymore. It was really just a small force for national defense, quote unquote. But Hitler has to destroy the Treaty of Versailles. That's the first thing he has to do. How is he going to do this? Well, he had gained a lot of support through the 20s because he had gone out basically trashing the treaty. Okay. So in terms of how's he going to destroy the Treaty of Versailles, if you're writing your notes down, he's already gone around during the 1920s, has condemned the treaty and also the politicians who signed it. He goes around and he points out all of the ill effects of the treaty in Germany. points out the inflation, points out the hunger problems, because there's a lack of food. And he points all of it back on the Treaty of Versailles, and then he takes it one step further and says, not only do you have this treaty to blame, but you also have the people that signed it to blame. He basically blames all of Germany's problems on the treaty. It doesn't matter if it's not the fault of the treaty or not. If there's a famine, famine's not the fault of the Treaty of Versailles. Famine is a result of weather. But Hitler is still going to spin it and blame it on the treaty somehow. Any problem that Germany has, that's what he's going to blame it on. Now, once he comes to power, in the early 1930s, and I'm skipping ahead to, I'm not going to get nearly as far as I thought I was, but that's okay. Once he comes to power in the early 1930s, a lot of the reparations, and remember reparations are payments for war damages, had been either cut back or canceled altogether. Okay? So already the Treaty of Versailles has been weakened. And it's not even by Hitler's doing. If you'll remember back to when we talked about the Treaty of Versailles, we said that it was very, very damaging to Germany. It really wasn't all that fair to the German people. And other nations had sort of recognized this. So over the course of the 1920s, they had reduced those reparations or eventually canceled them altogether. So the rest of the treaty, the reparations are taken care of. Germany is no longer having to financially pay either at all or nearly as much to these foreign powers for their part in World War I. So there's four things then that the treaty has that remains in force. And these are the four things that these are the four specific things that Hitler has to do in order to completely get rid of the effects of the treaty. The first thing is he has to regain the lands of the Saar and the Danzig region, among others. Okay, so the first thing is regaining the lands of the Saar and the Danzig regions. Secondly is he has to convince German-speaking people from Austria, the Czech Republic, Poland, among others, to come back to Germany. That's about 7 million people total, which is a lot of people. So the second thing is he has to bring German-speaking peoples back in from those three areas, among others, back into what is known as the mother country of Germany. Thirdly, he has to find a way to build up the German army, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. And finally, he has to expand to the east against the Russians. And it's worth pointing out that Hitler absolutely abhors communism. He hates communism. In fact, most German leadership and most leadership in what is called the West or Western Europe, most of them hate communism. And that's going to be something that's going to be important to keep in mind throughout the whole of this conflict, is that the USSR is the largest country that's in this war, but they're also the country that everybody hates, sort of their form of economics and their form of government. And that's both the Allies and the Axis powers. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that he wants to expand to the east against the Russians because he hates communism and he knows that they are probably his most formidable opponent. And this is a sort of a political cartoon, and we'll end here today just talking about how Hitler sort of is playing nice with all of with all the different statesmen of Europe, and you can go through and you can see, we can point out all the different world leaders that are in this cartoon, and we'll open with this tomorrow. So again, I know it's a little more difficult because I didn't have the underlining, but I tried to point out the things that you need to have written down. I will check these first thing tomorrow morning to make sure that you're on pace and to give you credit. If you're one of them that doesn't have internet, you'll just need to get this taken care of. You'll need to get this gone through to start to make sure that you have this information sort of as a precursor. But stay safe today, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow, Tuesday, February the 3rd.